Hi, welcome to the Shepherd Podcast. I'm your host, I'm Pastor Chris. The podcast is a way to acquaint you with some of the people here at Shepherd of the Hills, our church, school, and child care. My guest for today is someone that you might already know pretty well, Pastor Doug Bielefeldt. And our theme for today's episode is Bethlehem. Pastor Doug has made 2 trips to the Holy Land. He has a 3rd trip coming up in May, and he spent some time in Bethlehem. And so I thought, with it being close to Christmas time, that you might be interested to learn a little bit more about the birthplace of our Savior. And so Pastor Doug has put together some photos to show you, and he's going to tell us about his experience and some things that the Bible tells us about Bethlehem. And so I'd like to welcome to the podcast now, Pastor Doug.
Why, thank you, Pastor Chris. This is like old times. I always enjoy doing this with you, and I hope you all will find this very beneficial and useful as well. It was fun to go back through my notes and pictures and try and remember some of the things that, some of the places we went to and visited and some of the experiences we shared.
Have you been to Bethlehem on both of your Holy Land trips?
Yes, been on 2 trips, 2014 and then in 2017. And then, as you mentioned, we have another one coming up in May. That was actually, it should have been already. It was scheduled in September, but because of health concerns, we had to postpone. Right. And so we've rescheduled for May, and we will visit Bethlehem again. You've been to the Holy Land, so you know there are certain places you must go to, and Bethlehem is one of those. And so I always look forward to taking our tour groups there.
And I think you'll probably share about this later, but Bethlehem is not the easiest place to get to and from, and so it's one of those places where you really have to want to go there.
And it's not a little town of Bethlehem, how still we see thee lie. Yeah. It's anything but still and sleepy and all of that. And we'll share some of life today in Bethlehem, which, to be honest with you, I don't think has changed much since the time of Mary and Joseph and all that they had to encounter when they first visited.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
And just to go back, you mentioned that the trip was postponed because of health concerns, not health concerns for you or any individual, but
no, Israel
COVID.
Closed their borders, as did many nations in the world, just because of the Delta variant and increased COVID exposures and all that kind of stuff. So Israel closed their borders. The borders are now opened again, and we'll see. The members of my group keep asking, is the trip still on? And I was very confident back in June and July when I said, yes, the trip is still on. And I'm very confident things will be okay, but it's all in the Lord's hands. So, yeah.
And a little more on the personal level. So your interest in traveling to the Holy Land, how did all of that start? And now, you're embarking on not just the Holy Land, but you've traveled to some other biblical places.
Sure.
What was the genesis of all of that for you?
I had an opportunity, Pastor Dan and you had both visited the Holy Land, and we had an opportunity to lead a tour, and both of you guys were gracious and said, we've been there, and so I was asked if I would head it up. Long story short, the tour guide, who I did not know for that very first trip in 2014, we became best friends, and he has been our tour guide now for not only that trip, but in 2017. Okay. And then I scheduled a trip to Greece and Turkey with him 2 years ago, and now we've got another trip in May.
Yeah, so you're just hooked on the travel.
He's a great friend. He's, quite frankly, the best in the business. Yeah. The funny joke is wherever we go in Israel, everybody knows the guy. He lives in Canada. He immigrated to Canada years and years and years ago. He was born in Jerusalem, raised, and just got tired of some of the turmoil and chaos that is part of that region of the world. Yeah. Wanted to immigrate to the United States. It was going to be the timetable was too long, and so he ended up in Canada. Yeah. But he goes back, and everybody knows him.
Wow, well, that's great. You got connected to such a good tour guide.
Yeah, we did. We're very fortunate. Yes. Yeah.
Well, let's start talking about Bethlehem just with, a broad question of the significance of place.
Okay.
Why is it of value that a person would want to travel, let's say, all the way from the United States, go through all the trouble to go to this place where, well, Jesus isn't there anymore. He's risen. He's ascended to heaven. Why go back and visit a place?
Great question. Geographical history matters to us. I mean, just go downtown to the Alamo and any day of the week and you'll find tourists there. And even to this day, if I go downtown and I'm by the Alamo, I just try and envision what life was like, 150, 180 years ago. Right. And then when you add it to something as significant as as biblical times, not just the life of Jesus, but going all the way back to Abraham and Moses, and to read about those places in the Bible, and then to go to those places, that's pretty special. Mm-hmm. Now, that being said, I always tell our tour groups, it is the Holy Land, not because the land is holy, but it is because of the God who chose that area to locate himself, and it is that which makes it holy. I'm going to put this in a very nice way. Israel, the state of Israel, is the state, a political entity, just as Britain, France, United States. Yeah. What makes Israel, or what made Israel holy, was not the particular ground and areas around there, but the fact that God chose, for reasons known to God, he chose this region to locate himself to his people. An example, in the very first book of the Bible, in Genesis chapter 2, we read that God planted a garden in Eden, okay? So he chose a very relatively small area with which to locate himself for Adam and Eve in this garden. And where the Creator locates himself, there are his gifts. And so he located himself in Eden, gave his good gifts until Adam and Eve sinned, and then they were removed from that location. There was a barrier that was placed, and Jesus Christ eliminated that barrier. Where the Creator is, where the Lord is, that is where his gifts are. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So Moses sees a burning bush, and a voice tells him, remove your sandals. This place, this ground is holy. Well, it was holy not because of special land or a special bush, but because God was present there. The next day, I'm going to guess anybody could. It was just an ordinary bush and ordinary land again. Yeah. What makes it holy is the presence of the Lord.
So there's a whole theology of place.
Yeah. God, and again, we don't know why God chose that region, but he did. Yeah. That's why we call it the Holy Land. The other thing I always tell our tour groups is use your imagination, but also remember, it's been a long time. In the life of Jesus, it's been 2,000 years. Mm-hmm. Things have been destroyed, rebuilt, destroyed, rebuilt, destroyed, rebuilt. The upper room is now a basement just because of the way over time things have been destroyed and rebuilt. And we don't know exactly, I always tell people, the tour guides will tell you this is exactly where this and this happened. And it may well be, I can't dispute that, but you just sort of take it with a little common sense. Just over time, we don't know exactly where everything precisely was, but we do know we're reasonably close. Okay. And I'll explain that in terms of, like, for instance, the Church of the Nativity, why it was built there, and why that's a good clue that something significant took place on that site.
Okay. Well, I'm eager to see the pictures and to hear your description of them. Before we do that, maybe just a little more about Bethlehem, just to give some context on what the Bible tells us about Bethlehem.
Yeah, let me give you, Bethlehem is not just this place that shows up in Luke chapter 2.
Right.
It is this place that is there from all throughout the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. And in my mind's eye, there are 4 significant places that Bethlehem has revealed to us. The first place that Bethlehem, by the way, Bethlehem, in both Hebrew and Greek, translates to house of bread. And that's a great connection, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. But the first place is at the end of Genesis 35, Rachel, the wife of Jacob, who has given birth to Joseph and Benjamin. And because of complications in that delivery of Benjamin, she dies. The Bible tells us it was near Bethlehem. Mm-hmm. So that's the first place Bethlehem is mentioned. Mm-hmm. And then there's some other scant mentions throughout some of the other books. And then you get to the book of Ruth. Mm-hmm. And the book of Ruth is a fabulous reminder of the centrality of Bethlehem. Naomi, and her husband were from Bethlehem. Because of a famine, they had to journey to Moab, and there the sons marry, and then the sons die. The husband dies, and it's Naomi and Orpah and Ruth. Orpah goes back to her family. Ruth follows Naomi back to Bethlehem, and is there. She meets a man named Boaz, and he raises crops. That's one reason why we think Bethlehem may be the house of bread, because he was a wheat farmer. Ruth gleans wheat. Boaz notices her. They are married, and then let me take you to the last couple of verses of Ruth chapter 4, and it's entitled "The Genealogy of Jesus." And this is significant. Now, remember, they're back in Bethlehem. They have a child. Now, these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. So Boaz is the woman that marries Ruth. Boaz fathered Obed. They had a child, Obed. Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David. So we're just 3 generations away from King David. And so that's 2 significant places in the Old Testament. The third is when we first meet David in 1 Samuel. It's the story of David and Goliath. And prior to that, we're told that his father was a Bethlehemite, and he raised sheep. And so we encountered David living in Bethlehem. And so we've got that anchor that's his home. And then perhaps the most significant is the prophecy of Bethlehem, Micah chapter 5, verse 2, that you, Bethlehem, though you are the least, out of you will come this Messiah. So you take those 4 references, and then you go to Luke chapter 2. Let me do that really fast. And Luke's in the New Testament, right?
Last time I checked.
Okay. Luke chapter 2, and in those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all went to be registered, each to his own town. Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem. Why? Because he was of the house and lineage of David. All of this reminds me, this was not a happenstance. It just, Caesar Augustus, we've got to do this. It was all orchestrated by God.
Right.
Caesar happened to be part of the plan that God used, unbeknownst to Caesar probably. But it was all part of God's plan by which he would locate himself through the incarnation of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, isn't that neat to see that thread through the Old Testament?
Yeah, really fascinating.
So God was setting all of this up for a grand moment, the arrival of Jesus.
Amen, yes.
Yeah. Would you like to begin the tour?
I would. Let's take a tour.
Yeah.
Now, we have some pictures that you're going to see behind me. I have some pictures in front of me because those pictures aren't visible to us right now. This is our 2017 tour, and this is the group that went with us. You'll recognize some faces there, and you'll recognize some, or you won't recognize some. The guy kneeling next to my wife, Nancy, in the, what color is that, turquoise shirt? That's our tour guide. His name is Ray Ed, and that's our tour guide. So we are standing outside the Church of the Nativity. The reason you see the 2 flags there, the Canadian and the American flag, is because of him. He's a Canadian citizen. Yeah. And then there's a couple of people in our group that were also Canadian citizens. So we've got that group. You mentioned the difficulties in getting into Bethlehem. Let me show you some pictures of those. The first picture, it shows you a wall that surrounds us as entering in, so you can already tell Bethlehem is not just this little welcoming, soft, gentle town. There's some security issues. And then as you approach, and I think you even mentioned this in a sermon, you shared this one time about your visit to Bethlehem. If you can look on the picture, you'll see no Israeli citizens are allowed. So Bethlehem has been under various political entities over the years. the British had control for a long time, and then the Israelis took possession, and now it is the Palestinians who have it. So it's a Palestinian territory, and you have to go through a series of security checkpoints. You can, if you're an Israeli citizen, you have to have a special visa.
Right.
So the average Israeli citizen can't go. Tourists can go in and out as much as they want.
Question about the wall. So you talked about the wall earlier. That's not like the ancient wall of Jerusalem, is it? That's a modern wall.
That's a very modern wall with barbed wire.
Okay.
And it's a means by which to keep either people out or people in.
Yeah.
One or the other. And by the way, on the photo, you're going to see a cross that's hanging on the bus.
Oh, it's not outside.
That's a little thing that the bus driver had. He was a Christian, and he had it stuck on the windshield. Okay.
Yeah.
And then here's one of the checkpoints. This is the checkpoint entering in. And actually, this photo, I shouldn't have done it because you are not supposed to take pictures of the checkpoints. And I found that after I took the picture, my tour guide turned around and got no pictures.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a very secure region.
Sure.
But it's also got its laughs. So here's a funny place called Stars and Bucks.
Stars and Bucks. Very
I guess
clever.
they did. Starbucks didn't want to take them to task with copyright issues. So I had to take a picture of that because I thought it was kind of humorous in the middle of this high tension political place.
Right.
Bethlehem is also known for its olive wood. There's a lot of olive wood in the area and a lot of olive wood carvings. For those of you watching this, you may have bought some of that olive wood carving stuff from my wife, Nancy. We got connected to a shop in Bethlehem on our very first visit. It's Christian owned, and they employ Christians. Christians are a very, very small minority in that region. And this shop is dedicated to supporting Christian families. And so we do what we can to support them. And so Nancy got some of that olive wood, and she's been selling it. And then those proceeds go back to the shop in Bethlehem. And so there's a picture of some of the carvings.
Wow, that's great. So on behalf of them, you guys are selling the product and sending it back.
Yeah. Our tour guide, Ray, he gets it. So Nancy, she's been doing this, and last year, we couldn't sell because of COVID. I mean, we just couldn't have the contact. So we've had a great response this year, and we're looking forward to going in May and getting more.
Now, do they ship it to you, or do you bring it back yourself?
They can ship it. I took a picture of a beautiful nativity that they gave us at a really great price, and I forgot to load it up. But there's some beautiful stuff, and really beautiful stuff.
Now, you mentioned Christians are a minority. What would you say is the breakdown of Christian, Muslim, Jew in Bethlehem?
Gosh.
Mostly Muslim?
Mostly Muslim, mostly Arab. Okay. Probably hardly any Jews in Bethlehem per se.
Okay.
Although you'll see some pictures in a few moments of the settlements around there. The Jewish population at one time when Israel had gained control of the region, obviously lots of Jewish settlers there, but now it's pretty much Arab, Muslim. I would say Christians are maybe less than 8 or 7%. It's a very small, very small fraction.
And then any idea what the population in Bethlehem is
25,000.
25,000. That's a good sized town.
Yeah, it's a decent town.
Yeah.
It's busy. A lot of panhandlers. Maybe you remember when you were there. You can't walk down a street without somebody offering you stuff to buy. Yeah, very busy place.
Yeah. Okay. No silent night there.
No silent night.
It's noisy and busy.
Yeah. Yes. It's a very, and I'll be honest with you, the very first time we went, I didn't know what to expect, and I was a little let down just simply because it's, little town of Bethlehem. It just is not that. It's a high risk security, guards everywhere, and it's just, but again, imagine Mary and Joseph, they've got an occupying foreign army.
Well, that's true.
Forcing them to go for a census, and quite frankly, it was for tax purposes. Yeah. So that little town of Bethlehem, I'm going to guess it was a lot of unhappy Israelites because they had to, who knows what Joseph had to leave behind in terms of his livelihood to make this journey, and with his very pregnant wife, Mary.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to imagine it wasn't quite the gentle, the snow globe kind of nativity thing that we often envision.
Yeah, even then.
Yes, even then. Yes, yes.
Okay.
Okay. So this next picture is a picture of the Church of the Nativity. This church was originally built about 376 AD. It was built by Helena, who was the mother of the very first Christian emperor, Constantine.
Right.
She traveled to the Holy Land and began to search out important places where Christ had been, particularly his birth and his death. Now, this church and where it's built, this is why I feel reasonably confident that we're pretty close to the actual birth site.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, it's been 350 years since the events of Jesus' birth. But the original Christians and believers, they kept that site in mind. One generation would remind the next generation, would remind the next generation. And so people paid attention, and things were put there to mark those locations so it would remain significant, the same way in Jerusalem. Helena comes and she learns of all this, and so she decides to really mark the place by building a basilica, by building a church on top of it. And that's one of the good things, but one of the frustrating things in Israel. Wherever you find a place of significance, there's a church on top of it. So it's difficult to envision what was there, but that's some good news in terms of, well, maybe something significant really did take this place. Yeah. And they've built. Now, the Church of the Nativity, it's been built, destroyed, built, destroyed, built, destroyed. The building that we have today is not the one Helena built. Yeah. But we have reasonable good confidence this is generally where Jesus was born.
Sure.
Okay? And once you go in, here's the really good news. It is crowded all the time. At least it's the two times I visited. And in this picture, we were surrounded by people from every nation, tribe, and tongue. We had some Ethiopians. We had some people from Kosovo. We had some people from Russia, some people from Switzerland. We're all in line. And as you're making your way through this church, you'll notice some really ornate decorations. And it's sort of co-owned, if you will, co-used by three churches, the Armenian Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, and then the Roman Catholic Church. They coexist in this, and there are mosaics, and there is just all kinds of stuff. And if you look at the photo, when we were there was a restoration taking place. So the pillars on our left were pretty much restored. The pillars on the right, if you'll notice, the higher up you go, the darker they are because of incense. They constantly they use incense in their worship services, and the smoke from the incense stains the pillars. So while we were there, we were watching a guy meticulously scrubbing like with a toothbrush, trying to clean up one of the pillars. So all this restoration was going on. You make your way through the church, and all of it is headed downstairs to a cave, to what they call the grotto, and that is supposedly the birthplace of Jesus. A lot of people there. It gets narrower and narrower. The picture I have doesn't really do justice. And then you get to the downstairs area, and this could really be calamity if you're not careful, because it's just by stairs. And you've got thousands of people trying to make their way down. Here's Nancy waving. She was ahead of me, and she's making her way down the stairs. And then when you get there, there's another view of people heading down. There is the place that is supposedly the birthplace of Jesus.
Right.
Supposedly. It's a 14-pointed star. Anybody know why it's 14 points? The answer is, if you go to Matthew chapter 1 in the genealogy of Jesus, you'll get to Matthew chapter 1, verse 17. You got 14 generations from Abraham to David, 14 generations from David to the deportation of Babylon, 14 generations from that time period to Jesus Christ. So that apparently is the 14 stars. It's a little, again, it's not what I wanted to see a manger with hay in it or something, but they've got this silver star on the ground. Everybody bends. By the way, I took this picture off of Google because it was so crowded. Here's a picture of Nancy bending down to touch it. Yeah. Like I told our group, what makes something holy is the presence of the Lord. This is a beautiful star on the ground. Touch it just to say, oh, I touched it, but there's no mojo, nothing special. So everybody in our group, but you just got to go through quick. I mean, you got to touch it and go because there's people backing up and coming down the stairs.
So that's where the expression touch and go comes from?
Touch and go, yeah, touching. It's a drive-by nativity.
Okay.
And it's just not the nativity you would have expected to see, but it is the place. And then there's a series of caves down there. By the way, I bet everybody remembers this from when we did the Christmas quiz last year, right? And she gave birth to a child, wrapped him in swaddling clothes, laid him in a manger because there was no room in the inn. Again, the inn that is described there is not a hotel, a place of lodging. It is translated in Greek to guest room or front room. In doing some research, Jesus, later on in Luke, as he's preparing to celebrate the Passover, his final Passover, he gives two of the disciples instructions to go and find an owner of the house and ask him for the guest room. That is the same word in Greek.
Really?
For that as it is because there was no room for them in the inn. Same room. Now, to contrast that, the parable of the Good Samaritan, Jesus actually uses an inn. The Good Samaritan wraps up the wounded Jewish man, takes him down to an inn, right, and pays the innkeeper. And that is it's translated, it's a different word in Greek, and it's translated a place of lodging for strangers. So just to distinguish, most likely, my opinion is that Joseph and Mary traveled to Joseph's hometown by lineage, and he wasn't the only one. Other family members were there, and so it seems to me logic, they gathered where other family members were. We know that when Jesus was 12, Joseph and Mary traveled with a family entourage to celebrate the Passover. So I'm guessing they were there. It was time for Mary to give birth, and you just don't want to do that in the guest room in front of everybody. And so they found perhaps a cave, a place where animals were kept. And the only reason we think that is because she did lay Jesus in a manger, which was a feed trough. Yeah.
That's an interesting word study.
Yeah. And Bethlehem is the house of bread. And one time Jesus in John chapter 6 declared, I am the bread of life. And I just find it this stunning connection to Jesus. The one who would declare of himself the bread of life was laid in a feeding trough in the house of bread. It just cool. Gives you, it's one of those, God has to be orchestrating all of this. It's just such a fascinating connection.
Wow, that's great.
Yep. So we saw the star, and then the picture you see now is that's the room, and we were kind of quickly moving out of there. And then we moved to a place called the Shepherd's Field.
That looks like a shepherd's field.
It looks like a shepherd's field. We know that on that night, an angel appeared to the shepherds to announce the good news. That what is thought to be the shepherd's field is about less than a mile from the birthplace of Jesus. That makes sense. The shepherds are out tending their flocks by night. And they made it to Jesus in fairly timely fashion, so it couldn't have been a great distance. It is thought that this field is also the place Boaz may have raised his crops, where Ruth was gleaning. So don't know that for sure. Yeah. But it is the place that it is thought to be the place where the angels appeared. So you look around and you see some sights. But I mentioned Israel at one time occupying Bethlehem, and if you look off in the distance, you'll see all kinds of housing and community living facilities, and the place was heavily congested with settlers. So it's difficult to look off in the distance and try and envision it, but we envision it. We know the angels appeared. They gave the shepherds the sign by which to see the child. Micah's prophecy came true. The lowliest of people in society were the first to get the good news of Jesus.
Yeah.
God chose to locate him, and this brings it all full circle.
Yeah.
Where God is where things are holy. God chose the least, Micah's prophecy, God chose the least by which to locate himself in the form of an infant wrapped in swaddling cloths, lying in a feed trough.
Yeah.
And so that child, we know, would grow up. He would become, Jacob was the first Israel. He wrestled with God and his name was chained to Israel. Jesus became the final Israel. Where Jesus is, there is the Holy Land. And so just to kind of go the full circle and reiterate where I began a few minutes ago, where God is, there he is to give his good and gracious gifts. So today, we can go where God locates himself. We do it every Saturday and Sunday in our church and churches all around us. And there God is located in his word. There God is located in the waters of baptism. There God is located in the bread and wine. And it is that holy God that makes us holy, not because of who we are, but because of that child who grew up, died, and rose to make us holy in the sight of the Lord.
Now, going to Bethlehem gives you a whole new perspective. It's a great experience, but I hear you saying that you don't have to travel all the way around the world to have a close experience with God.
Exactly. What makes something holy is the presence of the Lord. Jesus said, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I'm there. And so when we gather each weekend, when we gather in worship, when we gather in God's word, we're at the Holy Land because it is God who makes that holy.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. This was a great tour.
I enjoyed preparing for it. I enjoyed looking back. There were many more photos. I mean, I had to kind of whittle it down because, when you're a tourist, you're taking pictures of everything.
Right.
And I'm looking forward to our visit in May. I would appreciate everyone keeping that trip in prayer, that we're able to make it and make it safely, and that it would be a great spiritual experience for all who are traveling, but always a reminder that the Holy Land is right here in our Bibles. That's where God is.
How cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Glad to do it again.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Shepherd Podcast. What a great tour we had of Bethlehem, and I found it to be very enlightening, and I'm sure that you did too. Please continue to keep up with the Shepherd Podcast as we continue to bring you other guests and topics of interest. And until the next time, the Lord's blessings to you. May he keep you healthy and safe and strong. The peace of the Lord be with you today.